What's up, guys? Welcome to Mets Off Day Live. I'm your host, Niki Lattarulo. Today I'm joined by Will Sammon of The Athletic and Mets radio broadcaster Pat McCarthy. Guys, thank you so much for joining the show. Been a while since our last Mets off day, and since the last off day, things have not been great for the Mets. They had 8-game losing streak bookended by 2 dramatic and close wins. They're now clinging on to the final wildcard spot in the National League, which has gotten down to a game and a half. San Francisco Giants are behind them. So we're here to talk all about it. Will, we'll start with you. What do you make of this Mets team right now, and what really is going on here?
Niki, I'm not sure if the show is allotted enough time to answer that, but I will give it my best. We're seeing really an erosion of just what was the best team in baseball over the last few months. And there are a few different reasons for that. I think at first, their biggest problem since then has been their pitching. They have not gotten quality outings from their guys. They have not gotten length from their guys either. And I think that has had, on a lot of days, a trickle-down effect of sorts where you're relying on your bullpen a lot. You're burning those guys out to an extent. And you're asking a lot of your lineup, which, yes, they should be doing more of the heavy lifting for this club, but they've been inconsistent, that group. And so I think you're seeing a combination of all of those things at once. And it progressively got worse this month. I think for just the bullpen, it's a group that should be a lot better than what it has been, and it's faltered. And then the lineup, especially this month in particular, it's been very, very inconsistent, especially after a great month in August in which we saw a lot of good things from them. It seemed like they were due for a little bit of regression, but instead of that, they sort of just fell off completely. So we'll see. They still have 2 weeks, of course, to redeem themselves. I think that they will, but they put themselves in quite a bind.
Yeah, I feel like I say this every time I'm on the show. I'm like, we have so much time. And now time is dwindling away, just 2 weeks, like you mentioned. So, Pat, we'll talk about the starting pitching, which Will mentioned. But do you think this team is going to be a playoff team?
I do. I think that one thing about this team is it's been a very peaks and valleys season. And the one thing that we do know is that when they do hit one of those peaks, they kind of skyrocket. So I'm not saying that we're heading in that direction based off one win, but it's a pretty good start. And the fact that they have a game and a half lead over the Giants now and they own the tiebreaker over San Francisco gives them, I'm not even going to say wiggle room or a cushion, but it does give them a chance to be that third and final wild card team. I do think it's beneficial that the Reds are starting to slip back a little bit because that tiebreaker against Cincinnati was terrifying to me. But I do think that this team is going to make the playoffs at the end of the day. And if they do, chances are it's because they've started to win some games. I don't see a situation where they can backdoor their way into the playoffs. I just don't think it's realistic with 2 weeks left to play. I don't think that the odds that San Francisco plays equally as poorly for 2 weeks to me just doesn't seem realistic. So if the team does get in, it's because they're playing well. And if that's the case, look out because anything can happen.
Yeah, I think this series with the Padres is going to be very telling. If they win that game tomorrow, then I think from there everyone can kind of exhale a little bit. But you talked about the ups. The ups have been high, the lows have been lows. And a lot of the ups have come from the young guys, especially Nolan McLean, the young starting pitcher. So let's talk about him. Will, how has he been able to come up here and just find a way to be so successful despite there's a lot of pressure on him for his first, couple weeks in the majors?
Well, he has thrown 6 games, and it looks like he has been around for 6 years the way he pitches, right? Like he has the talent. That's no question about it. He has these 6 pitches. They're all really good. But just as important, he knows what to do each at bat. He has an idea of what a hitter is trying to do against him, and he's trying to exploit that. And he has the repertoire to do that. And he can play around. He can go through a lineup twice, 3 times, and a batter could see something different each time. He's that good, and when he has it going, he's just really, really hard to hit. And what's kind of got under the radar is just his ability to just get ground balls too when he needs it. It's a guy who just knows what's at stake, I feel like. And to your question about just the pressure, he just knows how to deal with it. I feel like I think he's relishing this opportunity in a way that just belies his age because he's somebody who loves the competition, and we're seeing that in real time. So I think that he just has a strong idea of how to pitch and who he is as a pitcher. And he looks like a guy who's been here before, and it's what the Mets need because he's playing stopper at the age of 24, and he's filling a role that they otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah, it's kind of like Nolan McLean, this young guy, is their ace right now, which is what I'm going to ask you, Pat. Do you think that Nolan is their best pitcher as of right now? And if the schedule lined up in a way where he could start game one of a potential wild card series, are you putting him out there?
No question. If it does line up and you are able to manipulate the rotation in a way that Nolan McLean is your game one starter, I think you have to do it. I think at this point, after 6 starts, you are seeing exactly what this kid can be. And I think this start for me against the Tigers is probably what was most impressive because the first 2 innings, he didn't have it by any means. And he admitted that. And you wouldn't know it by the video that we're watching right now because by the time the 3rd inning came around, he settled in and had the confidence to go back to the breaking balls, pitches that he said he didn't have the first 2 innings. For a guy that has been a full-time pitcher for a year and a half, he has an incredible makeup, and he's fun to watch, and you trust him right now. To say 6 starts is still a small sample size, yeah, I think that's pretty fair, but it's been 6 really consistent starts. And if that's what you're going to get from him in game one of a wild card series, I think you have to absolutely do it. Now, on the flip side, if you're fighting just to get into the wild card, you can't save him. You need him in a must-win game if you need him in 161 or 162.
Yeah, that's why the Mets kind of have very little time to figure out the rest of their rotation because he's the only one that looks really solid that you're like, okay, we can get a win if he's out there. But the Rangers were just in town. Jacob deGrom was just in town, and it was almost fitting that McLean had these 2 great outings with very little run support. Will, does it make it even more impressive that there's very little room for error and he's still performing the way he's performing?
Everything about him has been impressive, Niki. It's just been great to watch because really since the game 1 of his Mets career, they needed him. They needed him to win that game against the Mariners on his debut. He went out and won it. It's happened multiple times. It feels like every time they need this guy to perform, and he just performs. And even just his last start, there was a critical point in that game where there was runners on first and second. I think there were 1 out, and it was looking a little dire for him. He gets a ground ball, ends the inning, and it's just as if he's done this before. And it's just that to me has been the most incredible thing to see. Because again, like Pat said, we're talking about a guy who has not been pitching all that long. Like when he was in college, he was like a 1 or 2 pitch guy who was a reliever. And the Mets even had a hard time even scouting him at times just because he wasn't throwing a whole lot. So it was hard to really see what they had in him until they got him into the organization. And they've really helped him sort of just fulfill this potential. And I don't think there's really any question that he's their game 1 starter in the playoffs because he just has proven it time and time again. And even without the run support, with run support, it doesn't really matter because he's just going to go out and he attacks. He's not afraid to throw strikes. He's not afraid to challenge guys. And even when those days where he doesn't have a pitch or 2, he finds a way. And I think those pitches come because he's just that good. But even if they don't, he's good enough with the other stuff to still produce a quality outing.
Yeah, and Nolan McLean wasn't a guy that Mets fans were hearing about all too often. It was always the talk of Brandon Sproat. He's their top pitching prospect. He's going to get called up first. McLean went first, then Brandon Sproat. He's also looked solid. Pat, what are your early impressions on Sproat as a starter?
Really good. It's a small sample size again. It's been 2 starts, but the way he threw the ball the other day, I thought was really impressive. And to me, a big measuring stick is how a guy steps up in a spot when he is needed the most. And that is what he's done. He has started 2 games now that the Mets needed to win. Now, they haven't won those games, but he has put them in a position to win those games. And just getting a chance to talk to him prior to his start on Saturday, you got the sense that he's a guy that is very grounded, knows what he does well, isn't going to allow the moment to get too big for him. And I think the fact that he was tested in the minor leagues this season says a lot because for so many of these guys, they were the best players on their team from the time that they were 5 years old, and they had never been challenged. They had never really failed. Now, we don't know what goes on in these guys' personal lives. Maybe they have had adversity that we're not familiar with. But Brandon Sproat faced adversity on the field this year in AAA and didn't get off to a great start, despite the fact that a lot of people expected him to be the first pitching prospect up when the Mets needed somebody. He wasn't the first, he wasn't the second, he wasn't even the third. But he's come up in a big spot. He hasn't allowed that to affect him, and he's just proven that he is supposed to be here. So I think it's been a really impressive job by Brandon Sproat so far. The stuff is really good, and he just seems like he's got the makeup of a guy that could really succeed at the big league level.
Yeah, what you mentioned about his adversity, when I was in Cincinnati covering his debut, David Stearns said that to me. He was like, the reason that we trust him so much is because he not only faced adversity in AAA, but in college he was demoted to the bullpen and had to work himself back out. So he has like that get right mentality. He knows how to face that adversity and get through it. So I think both of those guys are going to be good in the playoffs if the Mets can get there. Jonah Tong is a guy that he looked really good in his first start. Then he was like average, and then he had that really rough start where he couldn't make it through the first inning. Will, is it kind of safe to say maybe they rushed him and he's not big league ready, or do you think that last start was kind of a fluke?
Well, when you talk to other teams, they sort of raise that question. And they do that because this was a guy who, unlike McLean and unlike Sproat, did not have a whole lot of time in AAA, right? So he was not up against the upper echelon of minor league competition, let alone major leaguers. So it was hard to see how his stuff would play. And what we're seeing and what we saw with the Rangers is when you have a distinct approach against him and you're taking that changeup and you're forcing him to be in the zone, maybe you can kind of get to him because he doesn't throw as many strikes as the other guys sometimes. So I think it's a fair critique and it's a fair question. But if this guy is on and if he's throwing strikes with that changeup and he's playing with the fastball and he's sprinkling in the breaking ball, the guy's really, really good. Like, he racked up all those strikeouts in the minor leagues for a reason. He's very, very tough to hit. So I don't think it's fair to necessarily judge the guy off his worst start and what would probably be his worst start in the major leagues. And you wouldn't want to judge him just off of one good start either. And this is kind of the situation that the Mets are in. I don't think it was something where they rushed him or they made the wrong move here or anything like that. I thought that it was the best move to promote him when they did, because they had to see what they had in this guy because he is that good. And I think that, unfortunately for them, they're in a situation where they're relying on all of these guys, and it's a spot where they shouldn't be in. And so it's a lot of pressure on these guys. And it's something that when they promoted him, they didn't think it would be this quite of a situation. I think in their best interest, or in their most optimistic view, it would be something like, hey, we're looking to see if this guy could be part of our playoff roster, not somebody who we need to win every single time he takes the mound. So it's a combination of those things. I think that he will be good enough to give them some quality outings down the stretch here over these last 2 weeks. And we'll see what they do from there as far as the playoffs go. But I do think it's a little bit unfair to judge him off of that one bad start.
And that one bad start was Jacob deGrom's return to New York. There was so much pressure, so many eyes. Maybe the moment was just too big, but I agree that you can't judge him off that one time. So we talked about Jacob deGrom, a veteran pitcher. Let's talk about the Mets veteran pitchers. Carlos Mendoza said the plan is to piggyback Clay Holmes and Sean Manaea on Tuesday night against the Padres. Pat, what do you think of that plan?
I think it's a great idea. I think the Mets have to get creative at this point. Mendy's had to manage the last 3 weeks or so like they are playoff situations. He's had to be ridiculously aggressive, and because of that, the bullpen has been asked to cover a lot of innings. I think Holmes and Manaea can complement each other really well. And the one thing that we have seen with Sean this season is he is really good through the first 3 or 4 innings. And then he starts to hit a wall and he runs into some trouble. And then with Clay, what has been so impressive to me about Clay Holmes is there's nothing really flashy about what he's doing right now, but he's giving them 5 really quality innings each time he goes out there. So if you can ask Holmes to go 5, you go Manaea with 3, or you go Holmes with 4, Manaea with 4, whatever, you shorten the game and you allow yourself to bridge to Edwin Diaz without having to cover 3 or 4 innings, which is, it's a lot to ask of your bullpen. It's one thing to ask 1 or 2 guys to be really good. It's another thing to ask 3 or 4 guys to be really good each and every night. So by having Holmes and Manaea go out there and piggyback each other, it's a completely different look. It's 2 guys that are nowhere remotely close to the same pitcher, and it's going to be uncomfortable at bats. And all of a sudden you can cover not only the first half of the game, but the middle innings as well, and put yourself in a successful situation, assuming both these guys throw the ball well. I think it's a great move.
Yeah, Will, what do you think about it? Do you think it'll remain like that the rest of the season, or do you think this is a one and done? How do you think it'll play out?
Well, I think it's a necessity as well, because I think in a perfect situation, the Mets would have maybe preferred to have gone with starts by design from some of their starters, whether that was Manaea or Holmes. But their bullpen has proven ill-equipped to handle that. Like they just are pretty shaky, aside from the back end guys. And even then, sometimes you hold your breath a little bit there. So they've had a hard time bridging that, and so they're going to do this. And I think it's something where they'll be a little bit fluid with it. We're going to see Holmes start the game, and then Manaea piggyback off of him. Next turn through, I suspect that will be the reverse, where Manaea would draw the start against the Nationals, and then Holmes would come in relief of him. But it's all subject to change, and they'll see how it goes. They're at the point, though, where they have to try it, and it's a necessity because other things have just not worked for this club.
Yeah, and I think the craziest thing is when you look at this starting rotation heading into hopefully the postseason, you have three rookies, and then you don't have Kodai Senga. He's down at AAA, had a solid outing for Syracuse on Friday, 6 innings, 1 run on 3 hits, no walks, 8 strikeouts, 74 pitches. The Mets do plan to give him one more start. But Pat, when he or if he does come back up, where do you think he fits into this rotation? That's kind of like a mishmash of things.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because the Mets need Kodai Senga, but they need Kodai Senga from the first half of the season, and they need the guy that can go out there and miss bats. And the one thing that we've seen when he's pitched at the big league level is he's just not missing bats the way that he was, and he's not getting strikeouts with the forkball the way that he was. And it's been a really weird, confusing season for Kodai Senga, for a guy that was pitching like a Cy Young Award winner for the first half of the season before his hamstring injury. And then it was a guy that really wasn't able to be effective anytime he went out there. So I don't know. I think Kodai Senga, if he's able to be the guy that they expect him to be, then he could be a really important piece for the Mets in the stretch run. Is there enough time? That I'm not totally sure. I just don't know what they want Kodai to do down in AAA. Now, if he goes out there and they feel like the metrics are what they want and he's getting the swings and misses that they want, then yeah, I could see a situation where they bring him back up here. I just don't know.
Yeah, Will, do you trust him in a postseason start?
They trusted him last year off of not pitching at all last year. So it's interesting. I think the answer could be yes, actually, because you still have some time here to play with. He's going to get that one more start in AAA. If he looks good, if other guys falter, then I think that they probably have to give him another shot, because they just don't have that many options here. Right now, the options probably would be, off the top of my head, maybe McLean, Peterson, Sproat, or Holmes in there as a starter for the playoffs. But like Pat said earlier, it sort of depends how you get into the playoffs, because you may be relying on those guys too close to that series start where they won't be available for you, maybe. So it depends, and they may be backed into needing Senga there, which is why in some ways they had to send him to the minors to sort of get right, because he is that break glass in case of emergency guy. And when his stuff is on and when he's right, it's undeniable. Like, his stuff is really good, which was why they chose him to be that guy last year, despite missing all of that time. They were able to roll the dice, or they were willing to roll the dice there. And I suspect that if their backs are up against the wall this time, they would have to do the same.
I guess this is why you don't want to wait till the last 2 weeks of the season to get into the playoffs. You want to give yourself a little wiggle room, which the Mets don't have right now. To wrap up our starting pitching conversation, let's lastly talk about David Peterson. You mentioned he'd probably be your number 2 in a postseason rotation, but I'll ask both of you. I'll start with you, Pat. His second half hasn't been as good as his first half. So do you really trust him going into the playoffs, or you have kind of no choice?
Yeah, I feel like we're giving a lot of the same answers for each and every question. I don't know if you have a choice, because who else are you going to run out there in those situations? Mm-hmm. And for so much of this season, David Peterson was your most consistent guy, and he was as steady as anybody. And it was a really tough month of August for David Peterson, but I feel like his last start was better, to the point where they feel like they're getting him moving in the right direction. With David Peterson, it all comes down to the sinker. And if the sinker is down in the zone and he's getting ground balls, he's going to be effective. And that's the biggest thing for David Peterson. But for so many of these guys, they've reached career highs in innings pitched. They're pitching way more than they ever have. David missed so much of last season with the hip surgery, and that's what really got him healthy. So I think you have to start David Peterson at some point in the playoffs just because he does have the ability to go out there and dominate, but they need him to get right again. And that's like so many guys on this roster. But for him, it comes down to the sinker being down in the zone, the sweeper being an effective pitch, because for so much of this season, he was the only reliable arm that you had out there. But Niki, as you said, it was a really tough month of August for him. And if they can get him moving in the right direction over the final two starts, then yeah, I think he is one of the guys that you start in a playoff game with the luxury of knowing that he has pitched out of the bullpen in the postseason, and he has been successful at that if you need him to.
Yeah, Will, what do you think about it? His decline?
For me, it's actually too risky because he just puts the ball in play too often for me. As a playoff guy, I think you want more swing and miss in the playoffs. And I think what we're seeing sometimes is when the ball is in play, the Mets are not a lock to make the play. Like their defense is not good sometimes. And so that puts a lot of risk, I think, in starting David Peterson actually. And from what I'm seeing the last couple of months, it's almost like 50-50 with maybe you get a good start, maybe you don't from him. And to me, that's just not good enough. I respect and I appreciate what he's been able to do in the regular season. But I think come the playoffs, like I just prefer more swing and miss, and especially with a team that has trouble making plays, I just question what you may be getting from a David Peterson start in the playoffs.
Yeah, there's no guarantee anyone's going to catch the ball, make the double play. I just think this last month or two has given everyone a little bit of anxiety. So where when the ball gets hit, no one has any. It's going to be the play is going to be made. But we talked about the wild card race. Let's look at it once again. The National League wild card standings as of today, the Mets hold the third and final wild card spot, 1.5 games ahead of the Giants, 2 in front of the Diamondbacks, 2.5 in front of the Reds. You see that board right here. Pat, putting you on the spot. You already said you think they're going to go to the playoffs. If they get there, can they make any real damage and make some sort of run like they did last year?
I do, because I don't see a situation where they can backdoor their way in. And if that's the case, then I don't know. Because then I don't know how things played out over the last 2 weeks that they were able to get in. In my opinion, the only way that they get in is if they start playing really good baseball. And if they're playing really good baseball, they can beat anybody. And they can be the team that had the best record in baseball. Now, that was a long time ago. That was 3 months ago that this team was 21 games over 500. Since then, they haven't played even remotely close to that. But they've proven that they can go out there and win 8 games in a row. They've also proven that they can go out there and lose 8 games in a row. So I think if they get in, they're a team that can make some noise, but they have to pitch better and they have to get the lineup clicking. In August, that team could out-hit anybody, and it wasn't sustainable, but it was because it was 1 through 9 in the order. Guys were driving the baseball, and they were scoring 7-8 runs a night. And we had said it wasn't sustainable. We said there's no way that they can outmash everybody each and every night. So they need to get the pitching to step up. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to guys being able to eat innings, throw strikes, and allowing Carlos Mendoza then in situations to be aggressive, but knowing that the bullpen is going to get outs when they need them to. So, yeah, I think if they get in, it's because they're playing well, and I do think they can make some noise because, as we've seen, the hottest team that gets in a lot of times has the most success.
Yeah. Well,
I actually think that their active roster is better for the playoffs than it is for the regular season. And I say that because their pitching staff, the design of it, you could finesse your way through the playoffs a little bit. You could ask one guy to give you 3 innings, another guy to give you 2 innings. All of a sudden, it doesn't really matter that Sean Manaea can't get to the 6th inning for you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that Edwin Diaz, you don't want pitching back-to-backs. It doesn't matter. He's going to pitch back-to-backs. Like, the small amount of pitchers that you may trust, that's okay in the playoffs. It's getting there that's the issue. But I just feel like once they're there, they can be taken seriously as a big contender for the World Series because of that. Like, they can mix and match with their pitching staff a little bit. And with those young pitchers, Sproat, McLean, Tong, they don't really necessarily need set roles for some of those guys. And you could play around with Clay Holmes a little bit too. So, like, they have the pieces that make for an intriguing group. Plus, you have guys in your lineup like Juan Soto is a part of this roster, Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor. You don't need all of them clicking for a playoff series. You just need one or two of those guys to have a huge series to lift you, and they're good enough to carry you through that sort of thing. So I actually think that they're more equipped, as crazy as it sounds, for the playoffs than they are the regular season. I just feel like with this roster, there's a lot of cracks where like you don't like them over a 10-game stretch because they don't do enough good things. They're not that deep. But in the playoffs for 3-4 games, yeah, I like their chances actually.
All right, I think Mets fans are going to love to hear what Will just had to say. I think that's the positive energy we need. Well, like you mentioned, the 10-game stretch is usually an issue. They broke an 8-game losing streak in dramatic fashion. Pete Alonso coming through in the clutch, 3-run home run to walk it off in extras. It kind of gave the same feeling as last year against Milwaukee. Pat, could that win spark the Mets out of this funk?
I hope so, because at some point, some win was going to have to do it. The question's always asked, is this the most important win of the season? And the answer is always, well, every win's important. Well, right now, every win is important. And they couldn't get any sort of momentum going until the 8-game losing streak came to an end. They needed a win like this because they needed to prove that they could bounce back. That's the one thing that we haven't seen from this team all season long is being down late, or in this case, tied late, and figuring out a way to win the game. That's what they did in this situation. And guys stepped up. Diaz comes in. He's got the runner at third base with one out. They get the double play. Ryan Stanek, who has had such a struggle all season long, comes up massive in yesterday's win with that strikeout of Adolis Garcia and then the pop out of Rowdy Tellez to escape the 10th inning. And then at that point, you felt like they were in good shape because the placed runner had been stranded and you just needed Pete Alonso to come up. And he did. He came up huge when they needed the most. Pete's been struggling recently. The one thing that we know about Pete, and Will just kind of alluded to this, that when he gets going, he can carry a team. And when Pete gets hot, he gets really hot. And those home runs come in bunches. So maybe that gets them going. Maybe that gets Pete Alonso going. And they can use this as a bit of a jumping off point into the final 12 games.
Yeah, the Mets need everyone in their lineup to start to do something. Will, it looks like only Juan Soto has been doing anything offensively. What have you been seeing up and down this lineup that's just not working, or is it just a case of bad at-bats, bad hitting?
Yeah, when I looked at their 8-game losing streak, I think their collective OPS was something like 600. And if you took away Juan Soto's production, I think it dropped by like 50 to 100 points. And that's pretty stark of a difference. And you can't blame Juan Soto for this. Juan Soto has done his job. He's done very well for the last few months. I think since June, actually, last I checked, he had the highest FWAR in baseball among position players. So he is definitely doing his job. It's just he's not getting much help these days. And the one guy who I would point to sort of, I think, change that down the stretch is Francisco Lindor. He's gone a long while without a home run. I think it's up to about 60 plate appearances or something like that. That's too long for him. I think he's due for a really strong last 2 weeks of the season. And we've seen it the past couple of games. Like when he gets on base, he's almost playing with this like level of urgency of like, I have to score. We saw that in the first run the other day. We've seen that with him being a little bit more aggressive on the bases, stealing bases, just doing everything possible to move into scoring position and then score. So he is playing with that heightened sense of urgency. I think that does have a trickle-down effect on the rest of the roster. It's just he needs to be playing well for that to happen. He needs to be getting on base. He needs to be making things happen at the top of the order. So up and down the lineup, we've seen them just take too many called strikes. We've seen them chase a little bit too much. Some of that's been good pitching, but those are the guys that they're going to see in the playoffs anyway, and that has to change regardless of the quality of pitcher that you're facing. So I suspect it will. However, it will be tough against the Padres considering the arms that they're going to be seeing. Nonetheless, their lineup is really talented. I mean, Brendan Nimmo had the home run, but he had not had an extra base hit throughout September before that. So there's a bunch of guys that you can kind of point to and say, we need more from this guy, we need more from that guy. Chances are it's going to turn. It's just a matter of will it turn in enough time.
Yeah, and someone that's been giving their all and really working to get back with his team was Francisco Alvarez. He had the hand injury, then he had the other hand injury, and now he's back somehow playing through all this. Pat, what do you make of his return, and what do you think he adds to this team, or is he not doing enough offensively to be a spot in this lineup?
He is so impressive, and I give him so much credit. I asked him the other day in Philadelphia, I said, why are you doing this? Because nobody would have faulted him that after he tore the ligament in his thumb to go get the surgery and just say, okay, that's it for this year and and come back in March and hope that he's feeling well and ready to go. Nobody would have faulted him after he broke his pinky to shut it down and just say, okay, this is just not my season. I'm calling it. He feels the exact opposite. He told me that this has been the most trying season of his career, and he wants to finish it on his own terms. And I give him so much credit for that, because he is going out there. He's not 100%. And the one thing that we have seen from Francisco Alvarez since he came back from the minor leagues a couple of months ago, he's been really impressive, and he has been the Francisco Alvarez offensively that they need him to be. And I just think if he wants to be out there, you have to let him out there, especially with the way that Luis Torrens has been banged up. I don't know if I've ever seen a catcher take more foul balls behind home plate than Luis Torrens. It's absolutely amazing how beat up he gets, that this IL stint was kind of inevitable just because of the bumps and bruises that he's had. So I think Alvy has to be out there, and I think he brings so much to this roster. We saw it yesterday when he came in to score on that ground ball, and just the energy that he brings and the way that he can fire up a team. So I just think what he's doing is nothing short of remarkable, and it's really impressive.
And it would be different if it was like a different position to have all these hand injuries. The fact that you're catching and you're catching the ball every single, literally all game is even more impressive. But all right, let's switch gears and talk about the bullpen. They haven't necessarily been impressive. Another roller coaster scenario for the Mets, but it ended up working. They couldn't hold on to the lead, but it ended up being fine. Will, when it comes to this bullpen, do you have confidence, or are you concerned, especially in the postseason?
Well, for the rest of the regular season, I'm very concerned. I don't think that there's enough trusted arms that Carlos Mendoza has at his disposal to kind of get you through enough wins sometimes. It's hard when you're just relying on 2 or 3 relievers at this point, because your top setup guy, Ryan Helsley, he has just not figured it out in a Mets uniform, and time is almost out for him to do so before the playoffs start. So it's hard. What we saw from Ryan Stanek was a great sign. Maybe he could emerge in that inner circle of trust for Carlos Mendoza. But right now it's a very small group. I mean, there's Brooks Raley, there's Tyler Rogers, there's Edwin Diaz, and then everybody else has been pretty shaky. So it's hard. And sometimes that could be sort of almost not a non-issue, but it could be mitigated in the playoffs because, again, like, you're not really relying on 6 guys. You don't really need to. You could stay with those same 3 or 4 relievers. So their problem is getting into the playoffs. Once they do, I do feel okay about their bullpen, but it's just a matter of getting there first, and that's where my concern lies.
Pat?
Yeah, I think Will hit it right on the head. And last year we saw it where it was 3 guys that the Mets used. They used Phil Maton, they used Ryan Stanek, and they used Edwin Diaz. And then they used David Peterson when they needed to. Those were the guys that were trusted out of the bullpen. So when it comes to the playoffs, when you're only playing 2 games in a row and then you have an off day, you can use your 3 or 4 high leverage guys and that be it. If Ryan Stanek can get right, that is a huge lift, because Will's right. Ryan Helsley, on the other hand, he just hasn't figured it out since he's been in a Mets uniform. So if you're relying on strictly guys like Raley, Rogers, Diaz, it's fine for the postseason, but to cover 2 more weeks of innings, you're going to have to get creative. And I think the Mets are going to have to make some decisions at certain points of who are the guys that they can trust in big spots. And can you afford, though, to run these guys into the ground to the point where when postseason play does come, all of a sudden they've pitched 6 or 7 times in the last week or so, and they aren't available. It's a bad spot to be in, but you do think that if they can get in, they do have the arms to be successful.
This is why the starters need to go longer than 6 innings for the next 2 weeks. Everyone needs to go deeper into games, because the Mets have 6 games, then they do have another off day on Monday. They wrap up their home schedule, Padres 3, and then Nationals for 3. We know every game is crucial down the stretch. This is what their next 2 weeks look like. Will, what do you make of this upcoming week before the next off day?
Well, it's a little tougher than it looks, because the Nationals sometimes they play really, really hard and they present a significant challenge, and other times they just look like a pretty bad young team. So you don't know what you're getting. Typically, they play the Mets pretty hard. We saw that just a few weeks ago, and so they're the wild card here. What you're getting from the Padres is a tough matchup. They're throwing 3 of their best pitchers, in Pivetta and Cease and King, and so it's going to be hard for the Mets to muster some offense against those guys. And then the Padres too, their offense has come around lately. Like, before I thought the Mets were maybe catching them at a good time because their bats had gone a little bit cold, but leave it to the Rockies pitching staff to fix that for them. And right now, the Padres, after scoring a bunch of runs, they're looking as tough as ever coming into Citi Field, with still some things to play for their own right. Like, they're looking to make some noise. They're looking to get right for the playoffs. They're looking to put a scare into the Dodgers for the division. So they have a lot of motivation, and they have a really good roster too. Not to mention the bullpen that is something that Preller put together that's actually working out for them. It looks like it's a very, very tough team. I think sometimes with the National League we have this tendency to look at it and say, oh, there's nobody that's really that good. I feel like the Padres can be that team. I do think that their roster is good enough to pull that off.
Pat, when you look at the wild card standings, which team do you think is the biggest threat to take over that final wild card spot?
It's hard to say. I think right now it's probably San Francisco, just because of the way that they've been playing, and they're playing with an energy that, as a team that has nothing to lose, it's amazing that we're talking about a team that had such a strange trade deadline where they bought early when they acquired Rafael Devers, and then they traded off basically their entire bullpen. Buster Posey was kind of in between with what he did, and all of a sudden Bob Melvin's squad is playing really good baseball. The D-backs are playing really well. So a lot can happen in the next 2 weeks. It's going to be whichever team gets hot. I don't know if the Reds can sustain it. They're such an interesting team, but they don't hit a ton of home runs, and their pitching is kind of Jekyll and Hyde. So I don't know how much of a threat the Reds are, but the Mets were 5 games up on the Reds about 10 days ago, and at one point it was down to a half game. So a lot of things can change over the next 2 weeks or so. So gut answer right now, San Francisco and Arizona, because those are the 2 closest teams, but a lot can change.
Yeah, guys, buckle up. It's going to be a crazy, crazy 2 weeks for the Mets. They had this crazy finish last year. Hopefully things don't get as dicey this year. Padres come to town Tuesday. Clay Holmes with the piggyback of Sean Manaea. We'll see how that goes. And then we'll be right back here next Monday, the 22nd. Final off day for the regular season. We'll get you ready for what's going to be a crazy final week of the regular season for the Mets. But that's all the time we have here on Mets Off Day Live. For Pat, Niki, and Will, we will see you back here next Monday.